But if someone were to come to me and actually specifically say, I want stream entry, what I would probably start them off on is the focus-in technique. That entails working with mental images, mental talk, and body emotion. I'm saying that's what I would probably start off with, not like, oh yes, this is the silver bullet, the white knight, the magic thing that guarantees stream entry. But for me, it's in my algorithm, it's a good place to start because it's pretty straightforward. A beginner can do it, and it's likely to bring some sort of insight fairly quickly. So the idea is that you go to image space and there's either images or there isn't. So you note see or rest. Then you go to talk space, same thing. Emotional body, same thing. Then you work with the whole system. So when you're working with the whole system, different things can happen. One of the things that can happen is that the system goes offline, typically momentarily. Mental screen is blank, head is quiet, body is emotionally neutral. Now, typically, the reason that happens is that something in the outer system sort of expands in intensity. A physical sensation or a sound. There's a lot of famous Zen stories along these lines. Someone's enlightened by hearing a pebble, strike the broom, or the teacher shouts, or one of my favorites, when you take a bath in the Zen temple, you in Japan, you bathe in these, in something that looks like this, except it's like huge, and it's a pot, actually, that's heated from the bottom. And you take off all your clothes, and there's this statue of Bharadwaja, who's the patron of the bathing area, and you have to bow down like this or whatever, because he was an arhat, and the way he got enlightenment was taking a bath, okay? It's like, okay, a bath can do it. So typically, external sight, external sound, and body, and or physical body sensation sort of impinges suddenly. And if you're monitoring the inner system, instead of getting pulled into that, you notice that as that expands, the inner system goes into a state of relative rest. Now that can happen to people at an early part of their practice. And that's already, that's not like enlightenment or anything, but that they're already getting a sort of insight as to how this system works. Now, there's another version of that that's more dramatic. And if that happens and you have a clear experience, that might change things on a more permanent basis. Instead of the inner system going into a relative state of rest, meaning see rest, hear rest, feel rest, you're where your screen is blank, you're listening to quiet in your head, and your body is emotionally neutral. Instead of that, you're aware that the inner space itself just vanishes. There is no image space, there is no talk space, there is no emotional body space. That's absolute rest in the inner system. And it's like the relative rest that a beginner can have, only more so. So one flavor of no self, even a beginner can experience. It's like, for a moment, there's relative rest, maybe because there's a strong activation on the outside. The inner system gets relatively restful. Then there's a much more impactful, restful state that's an absolute rest, a cessation of the space of self itself. So there's two flavors of no self right there. What else? Well, does that mean that in order to experience no self, the inner system has to turn off? No, not necessarily. The inner system can be quite active, but it's not tangled and not coagulated. If the inner system activates even strongly, but all the strands are clearly separate, they're not crisscrossing in an unconscious way, and if there's little or no freezing or coagulation in that system, it'll be active, but it's a kind of flow self. And that is yet another flavor of no self. It's tricky, though, to truly untangle that inner system, because the tangling is at many scales simultaneously. My metaphor would be, if, let's say you have 3 kinds of strands, red, green, and blue. The problem is they exist at many, many diameters. There's like, there's 3 inch thick and 1 inch thick and 1/10 of an inch thick and a half a centimeter and a millimeter and even sub-millimeter. There's all, for each one of the 3 colors, there's all these different scales. And now they're all intertwined. So inside red is subtle blue, and inside that is subtler green, etc., etc. And then maybe even subtler red again. So to fully untangle that skein takes a little bit of practice. But if you can sufficiently untangle it, and if you can let go of the tendency to tighten around its arising and passing. Oh my God, did it take me years to not resist the arising of self? Because I thought, well, the goal of this practice is, quote, no self. So if I'm aware of a self, I'm a failure with the practice, and that creates all sorts of tension. Took a long time to get out of that bad rookie habit. So anyway, the inner system activates perhaps even strongly, perhaps even in a very negative way. But it's untangled and unblocked. That'll create another flavor of self, a self, of no self rather. It's a freedom because of intensity of clarity. It's an untangling effect. It's an anti-emergent quality. Turns out that one of the requisites for the somethingness of self is that there be a kind of tangling of things. So the Sakkaya Ditthi depends on lack of clarity.